Carrying a firearm on school grounds in your car might soon be legal. A proposed bill in the state of Nevada would allow weapons on campus so long as they're kept locked in a vehicle. Some say this would protect our students. Others say it would cause more harm than good. Is it a good idea? Here for a fair and balanced debate, WTTG investigative reporter Emily Miller and executive director of Every Town Against Guns, Mark Glaze. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
So, Mark, in some ways, isn't this just a common sense correction? In a lot of states, if I am coming from hunting and pull onto a school parking lot and leave the gun in my vehicle, I can be arrested for that, though I'm not a threat to anyone. Isn't that something we should fix?
Well, I think we have to divide this into two questions. I feel about it the way you feel about it because that's how I grew up too. And one good thing about Nevada is that when you go to get a concealed carry permit, you also get a background check, which means you're not a felon, you're not a domestic abuser. So I frankly don't think this bill is that big a thing. I think it's mostly a convenience. The second question, though, is whether guns in schools or even in school parking lots make schools any safer. There have been 104 school shootings since Newtown, and they really don't.
Emily, do they not make schools safer?
Let's just talk about Mark's numbers. And this is a study done, paid for by Mark Bloomberg, who's Mark's boss, and on these school shootings. And they add in all these funny numbers, and that's why PolitiFact called it mostly false. In fact, if you look at, I've looked at John Lott's studies, which takes out gang-related shootings at schools, and also takes out suicides at schools. And in fact, school shootings are down. That being said, any school shooting is terrible, and we need to focus on that. But when you talk about people, just law-abiding people who have carry permits, who want to carry on campus, they're not creating any problems. There are no stories, and there are no examples of someone who has a law-abiding carry permit on a campus being a problem.
So, Mark, wouldn't it be useful if a school shooting breaks out to have some decent, normal, sane person with a firearm to protect the kids?
Well, that hasn't historically been the case, unfortunately, though some school districts are still trying it. We know at both Virginia Tech and Columbine, there were school guards, there were officers nearby, and it didn't stop them because often these kids are deeply troubled and they go in intending to commit not just mayhem, but also suicide, and so they're more heavily armed than the guards. But I will point out that we do count all of the school shootings that take place, and getting to that 104 since Newtown, some of them took place in the parking lot. It's just like taking tinder into a hot area where you don't need it.
Well, you don't need to take on the school shootings numbers. I mean, I think it's just it is a problem because a lot of the mainstream media picked up this study that Bloomberg paid for, and PolitiFact itself, I mean, don't take my word for it, looked at it and called it mostly false. So let's just be real. And I don't think scaring parents into thinking that school shootings are up is really a smart tactic, Mark. I think what you need to do is be honest. Like, any school shooting is terrible. And we've had terrible, horrible tragedies, but let's focus on where the real problems are. If a kid is dangerously mentally ill, he should be in a mental hospital. He should be getting treatment. I mean, having a new gun control law is not going to stop that kid from shooting into a school.
Well, what about
There's where the real issues are.
Mark, I mean, that's an interesting point. You've seen a bunch of shootings in so-called gun-free zones. Clearly, those didn't help. Shouldn't we be focusing on mental illness?
Well, mental illness is one of the things we have to focus on in this country, but here's the thought that I like to present to people. In the United Kingdom, they are not more or less mentally ill. Their treatment is not better or worse. They watch the same movies and they play American video games, and we have 25 times the murder rate with guns in this country than they do there. It's only because of how we regulate guns, not how we deal with mental health.
Really? I wonder why, Emily, then how would the gun control people explain a state like Maine, which has a ton of poverty, it has a ton of single families, got a ton of drug and alcohol abuse, and a ton of guns, but there's almost no violence? Why is that?
Well, I mean, I don't even like to talk about what's going on in Europe. I mean, we're not Europe. It's America. We have our own culture. We have our own Second Amendment. Like, that's the fact. And the Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's pretty clear. And the one thing, and Mark, tell me if you want to disagree with me on this point. Tell me one gun control law that has ever reduced gun crime.
Okay, so we're down to 15 seconds here, Mark. Can you answer the question?
You can't measure what didn't happen, but I can tell you when we passed a universal background check law in my home state of Colorado, literally hundreds of people who are not qualified to buy guns because they're felons, domestic abusers, or have other crimes have been stopped from buying guns at the point of purchase.
I'm sad we have to leave it there.
But let me just say, in
I'm going to make a lunch
there's been
date for the three of us. I'm sorry, we're totally out of time. Thanks so much, both, for joining us. Mark and Emily, appreciate it.